Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 7th of the Medicaid Monday series. Frank Hemming on my left and myself, very happy that you could join us today. And today we're going to cover a topic that is very COVID related, and that is the re-establishment of the processes that were in place prior to COVID that we had a 3-year hiatus for. So during this federal health emergency, we had an ability to do Medicaid without really doing Medicaid, Frank.
Yeah, to a large degree, things got easier with a lot of different things. And that's all to say that COVID had its own challenges, but weirdly, Medicaid did get easier when it came to just things that we got very used to having to do a certain way, and then everything changed, and now it's going back.
So the first 6 Medicaid Mondays that you see here up on the screen are topics of traditional Medicaid applications, eligibility, home care applications, nursing home applications, appeal rights, what happens if you're denied. And so those 6 set the stage for current Medicaid application procedures, which are the old procedures.
Right.
And during COVID, Frank, what were the main differences in Medicaid application?
So the biggest things were you could attest to things. You could have many different people sign applications. Counties were much more lax, I think, on how they would actually verify things. They wouldn't actually require anything or certain things in documentation at all, and that all goes against how I would normally do applications for my first 5 or so years of practicing. And now we're seeing the easement on all the COVID rules. Now it's much more going to resemble what it used to look like prior to the pandemic and all the COVID easements.
So you had people who had been on Medicaid prior to 2020. You had people that applied for Medicaid from 2020 to 2023. And now everyone has to recertify. And I think it's a pretty big number.
It's a huge number. I mean, the other thing, obviously, is that we had a lot of people that have never had to do this before, right? Because you may have gotten Medicaid anytime in that 2020, 2021, 2022, even beginning of 2023 period where you've never had to recertify. You've never been asked to recertify and talk about what you have or your change in income or your change in assets. Obviously, that is different. The other big thing that we saw during COVID was that people were being taken off COVID. In many respects, the state was not allowed to disenroll people from Medicaid if you had been approved for it. Even if you told them I've been eligible for it, they couldn't disenroll people. So that's also the big change now, is because now, while it's certainly not quite what it was prior to the pandemic of keeping people on, they certainly can disenroll people now, which they haven't been able to do for the past 3 years.
And we're going to get into some more details about that. But one of the things that we've talked about for the last 6 months that impacts this is the increase in income and resource amounts. And this was a major change that was given to us from the good graces of New York State back in January, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, when I started practicing 8 years ago, the income allowance was around $700 to $800, and it's been slowly, steadily per month. And it's been slowly, steadily increasing during that time. And then all of a sudden this year, it jumped all the way up to $1697 for one, $2288 for a couple, and same deal with assets. Assets, again, when I started was more $14,000 to $15,000 range. Well, now we've doubled it. Now we're up to $30,182 for a single. We're up to almost $41,000 for a couple. So again, not that these are large numbers in large respects, that they're not, but they're substantially higher than we've ever seen before.
So for people who had income of, let's say, $1,200 and they applied prior to COVID and they had an income spend down, due to this increase in the income allowance, now their spend down is gone.
Right. And just to mention a past program, Sarah Grimes and I, Sarah from NYSARC, we talked a lot about that in one of our past Medicaid Mondays, where NYSARC and similarly situated pooled trusts are now seeing lesser numbers every month that they service, just because people, when they originally applied, had a spend down. Now they don't, because they have a much higher income allowance. So we see trickle effects of that in the system, not only with how do you get qualified, but do you still need a pooled trust in that sense when you're talking about income?
Absolutely. And when it comes to resources, most other states, you have to remember, the resource allowance is $2,000. which happens to be the SSI asset cap. And most other states adhere to a $2,000 asset cap. And Frank, New York has gone above and beyond.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we were already the highest I'd ever heard of, even when we were in the $14,000, $15,000, $16,000 range. But now that it's ballooned up to over 30,000 or 40,000, depending on the size of the household, there's nothing similar to this for Medicaid purposes in any other state that I'm aware of.
Nothing close. And again, if you had Medicaid prior to 2020, and you have now grown assets above what was then the resource cap of say $14,000, now you have $25,000, well, you're still eligible because the new resource allowance is that $30,182. So you need to be aware of these new resource and income limitations because it's going to impact your recertification. So with that, Frank, let's jump in and talk about what's been going on.
So we just wanted to put up just a graphical representation of what Medicaid has kind of looked like. And the big thing here is a lot of people went on Medicaid in the past 3 years. So when the pandemic started, we were looking at, roughly 1.8 million people less that were on Medicaid than are on Medicaid now. And now the question is, do people still need it? Do they still qualify for it? And are they going to be able to recertify and stay on it? But as you can see on the graphic in front of you now, it went from roughly 6 million people to now pushing at 8 million people, all in that 3-year period, all when life was different, life had shut down and people needed help. And now we're going to see what the overall effects of that are going to be as now people have to do some things to stay on their benefits.
So the biggest differences now are the documentation that's going to be required for Medicaid eligibility. And Frank mentioned earlier that you could do an affidavit and say, hey, I don't have anything. But now, Frank, for a nursing home application, just walk through quickly the documentation requirement.
Sure. I mean, the biggest thing when I hear nursing home is we have that 60-month look back period. Now that's been in place the whole time. That didn't stop during COVID or the public health emergency. But before, what people were able to do is they were able to attest to their assets. They were able to attest to not making any transfers, and the counties would then have to process that application and authorize Medicaid. Now the counties are going to go back to previous practice and require 60 months of statements, the actual physical copies. They're going to audit them, and you can't just say, oh, I don't have too much money, or oh, I didn't give any money away. They're going to start looking a lot more like they used to.
Now, in our firm, we didn't stop doing the 5-year documentation, the 5-year look back, and auditing that 5 years of financials. But a lot of applications, we believe, were filed without that due diligence, without looking at the 5-year history. And Frank, that 5-year history can be very revealing when you look back and you see withdrawals from bank accounts, you see transfers, even things that may seem very innocent. Well, I was giving money to my grandson for college. Well, that's a transfer of assets. I was giving money to my church. That's a transfer of assets. Or I've been private paying for home care and just paying in cash. Believe it or not, people do that. And it's very, very common today to be paying home health aides in cash, taking money out of bank accounts, several $1,000s a month to do so. What happens when you apply for Medicaid? And all of those transactions are revealed.
Yeah, so when you do things in cash, the counties typically will ask for backup documentation to show where that cash went. If you can show, so common example of where this isn't a problem. We have many clients in the past that they will do home repairs and they will pay a contractor in cash, but they are typically then able to go to the contractor and produce an invoice to show that $10,000 was taken out for the new roof, but here's my receipt to show that the $10,000 wasn't me giving it away. It was to pay my contractor for my new roof. If you can do all of that, you don't have a Medicaid problem, but you need to have the trail of the funds. And the unfortunate part with cash is it doesn't typically leave a trail unless you really go out of your way to make sure that there's one that's kind of hiding in the background. And if the counties come looking for those trails and they aren't there to be had, that leads to a period of ineligibility, that results in penalty periods, and that goes to a lot of the things we talked about in our nursing home Medicaid Monday webinar, if you want to go back and watch that one.
So they have enacted some rules that have been put in place to protect people, to give them a transition phase, if you will, to get through to where they have to go through all of this financial documentation. And it's onerous, something our firm does on a very regular basis. And it's a lot of work to collect 5 years of every financial record that a person has and audit those records to make sure that there are no surprises and no transactions that occurred within that time frame. So Frank, how are they trying to ease into this in this unwinding period?
So I think more than anything, it's, luckily we're very blessed that we have a very good relationship with the county workers. I still don't think that they're maybe necessarily auditing everything to the same level they were pre-pandemic, just because now of the volume of cases they're seeing. But at the end of the day, what I'm seeing in many, many offices, whether it's here in the Capital District or stateswide, is that I still think in general, workers are still very willing to work with people, right? They understand this has been a very difficult period. They understand the coverage is very important, and they are willing to work with you as long as you're willing to work with them. So the biggest thing, I think, more than anything, is to have the open communication with the county worker who's processing an application. If you're dealing with this currently for someone, be responsive to their requests, update them if you're running into problems. If you can't get something that they're specifically asking for, ask them what else you can do. A lot of times there is resolution to be found. It's just a matter of getting it.
And you file applications, Frank, in New York City with HRA, Long Island,
Yes.
in Nassau and Suffolk County DSSs, and all across New York State. Do you see any difference in treatment from place to place?
The biggest thing that I think we've seen recently has just been the processing time. Some offices are very quick to, you send something in, you get a document request within a few weeks. There are other offices where they've just outright said, we're behind, don't expect anything from us for 2 to 3 months, because that's how far back we are. That's another reason why I think this is going to be a very interesting time to see, because if the workers were already kind of underwater with the amount of applications and things on their desk prior to now having to recertify all their open cases, that's just going to be more work for, I still think what many would agree would be less number of workers in all of these offices statewide, without singling out a singular office. But I still think in general, there's still a worker shortage. And there's also a mass retirement of many talented Medicaid workers that we saw. And now we have a lot of new people in new roles where they don't have a lot of experience. And that also tends to lead to more questions and more delays. And now there's going to be more paperwork hitting everyone's desk going forward.
So you have this 3-year hiatus and the unwinding of the hiatus, and 9 million Medicaid renewals, which would occur within 1 year.
Yeah, so roughly from now until roughly a year from now, all the statewide Medicaid offices are supposed to, collectively process around 9 million Medicaid renewals. That's a ton of paperwork, and that's a ton of things to be looking into.
So one of the things, if you're representing individuals or counseling people, is to make sure their address is up to date.
Yes.
Because if you get the renewal notice and you don't submit it, there can be severe consequences to that. There is an exception for SNAP people, but overall, you need to respond. You need to turn in your information, and you make sure that the address on file at the DSS or HRA office is fully up to date, and that you're going to receive the things that you're supposed to receive. And then once people get that notice, Frank, what is their obligation?
So general, I still, it's similar to how we looked at things during the pandemic. I'm still kind of treating these as just run-of-the-mill, old-style renewals, where you have to document all of your income, all of your assets. We'll talk about why that isn't necessarily the case in just a few minutes here. But more than anything, it's just you want to get all your ducks in a row. You want to still show I am eligible for this. So typically that means all of your updated income statements, that's your 23 Social Security letters, your pension statements, it's your most recent bank accounts. If you're on community benefits, it's your last 12-ish months of accounts, statements and things. If you're on Medicaid for chronic care purposes in the nursing home. If you have large transactions over $2,000, start to get your explanations for those large deposits or withdrawals in order. Again, the county, if they audit all those things, they'd be asking for those things. So the more you can put together up front, the better you make that worker's life when they get it, the less things they have questions to ask you about. And then once everything is set and approved, you'll get the same renewal notice roughly 12 months, 11 months later, and then you start the process all over again.
New York has a public relations campaign that they're engaging in to try to educate people. But it's hard to get the word out. Some people just aren't connected
Yeah,
not getting the message?
I can, Lou and I were speaking about this on Friday, so while we were putting this presentation together, I actually saw one of these notices hit one of my social media accounts over the weekend. So I don't know whether it was because I was researching this or whether it was
talked
I
about
would say,
it.
or because I talked about it, or because
Big Brother is watching.
or because it was also, or if it was just happening to hit my phone anyway. But I did see one of these, so I can say notices like this are out there. So again, if you know someone who's either on benefits or went on the benefits within the past 3-ish years who may not know recertification time is coming, please let them know. This is not a scam. This is something you do have to respond.
And it generally matches up to your application date.
Yes.
So that's when the renewal period will be. And yeah, again, you have to watch the mail. You have to be cognizant that you're going to have this renewal. You have to submit the renewal within a period of time. And then the DSS or HRA office is going to get it. And Frank, what are they going to be looking for?
You're going to look at mainly, did your circumstances change? So did your income change? Now, most of the time that's going to be yes. That could be something as simple as cost of living increase. It could be something more drastic than that. It could be there were 2 people alive when Medicaid was put into place, one spouse passed, and now there's been a change in circumstance with Social Security benefits. Have your assets changed? Do you have new accounts? Do you close old accounts? Do you have a new life insurance policy? Something like that. The other big one there that we wanted to put on the screen is, they want to verify your residency. Because again, Medicaid is such a good and important program here in New York, but you have to be a New York resident in order to use it. So they're going to want to verify that you still live where you say that you live and that you didn't move, or that you're not only a temporary resident trying to access New York services. So that's also a big one. That's another reason why you want to make sure that that address is up to date, because if they mail something to your address that they have on file and it gets kicked back to the Medicaid office because you no longer reside at that address, clearly then they're going to start having questions about where you are and whether you're still entitled to these benefits. And sometimes that's yes, and sometimes that's no.
So once that happens, you get your renewal notice, you submit your renewal, and then you get an action by the county or HRA. And if that reaction and that response is that, well, you're no longer eligible, then you have to act very quickly.
Yeah, so then you have to go through the steps of filing for that fair hearing, or at least having that agency conference, things that Aaron and I talked about last month about what happens if you get a denial or you get a reduction, because you want to take steps to make sure that if you think the county is wrong, that you try to preserve your benefits. Now, sometimes they may be right. You may not be eligible. So then the question then could be, if I'm not currently eligible, then what can I do to become re-eligible? And then we can reapply. So again, circumstances can be different for different people, but you don't want to sit idly if you don't get the approval notice you were anticipating.
And they began this process in March with a July 1 date of when they could in fact terminate benefits. And well, here we are in July.
Yeah, so we're in July. So now if you're watching this, they can terminate benefits now.
It's fair game. And so you need to be aware of your rights, your appeal rights. And we do handle a number of Medicaid appeals, and something that is very possible. You get an administrative law judge to oversee what has been done by the agency, something you need to be aware of and know what your rights are. So there are some additional protections that have been built in New York. And why don't you walk us through those, Frank?
Yeah, so here's a big one. I actually wasn't aware of this until recently, where for 1 year, there will be no resource test for renewals. So essentially, what does that mean? That means that they're not looking at whether you're under that 30,182 number right now. So the thing, just to clarify though, is if you're newly applying to Medicaid, so if you've never been on Medicaid before and you want to get Medicaid going forward, you still have to be eligible. You still have to be under that 3182 asset number if you're a single person. If you're on Medicaid and you're just recertifying, that they're going to let that go for 1 year. Whether that happens again, who's to say? I'm still a little shocked that they're doing it for this year, but that's the case. If you don't return your renewal paperwork, so if for whatever reason you don't get it, right, it got lost in the mail, it didn't get forwarded to your new address, whatever it is, Medicaid will send you a second renewal notice. Again, they're trying to keep people on if they can. If you receive SNAP benefits, Medicaid's automatically renewed for 1 year. So that's a nice little carve out here for a more at-risk population. And then the other nice one is, so if you only receive Social Security, so if your only income is Social Security, you're automatically going to be renewed as well, because the counties can verify that on their own, on their end, especially since they're not looking at the asset or the resource limit during this first renewal period. Again, I think a lot of this has to do with just the amount of paper that's going to be hitting county offices, and if one way to kind of reduce some of that workload was to take the asset test away, I think it makes sense. I just don't know if we can count on it going forward past this year.
And to keep up with all of this, we recommend a couple of resources. We use them all the time. And one of our principal speakers at our annual Elder Law Forum is Valerie Bogart, who's with the New York Legal Assistance Group, NYLAG. And the NYLAG, NYLAG website is a phenomenal place to get information. We also use the Western New York Law Center, and that's WNYLC.com, to get updates and information. They track this, they know what New York State's doing, they look at all the regulations, and they put out bulletins so that you can stay up to date. Those are two, there are more, and it's New York Health Access. That's a group, it's a conglomerate of different organizations that help people through this daunting process, because there are 9 million people going through this now, and they're anticipating a significant number of people are going to lose their Medicaid benefits. And then what do you do at that point is another question. So aid continuing, Frank, is something that we rely on whenever we have to do a fair hearing. If someone has gotten Medicaid benefits and now those Medicaid benefits are curtailed or eliminated.
Yeah, so if you're getting benefits and now you're not, but you don't think that's the correct position or the correct result, obviously you want that aid to continue while you have that legal challenge to it. So aid continuing obviously is crucial to those who need it. I think Aaron and I spoke about this last month, where the time limit to request a fair hearing is normally 60 days. That's now been extended to 120 days if this is in terms of a managed long-term care or an hours determination. But when it comes to resources and income and all the things that we're talking about now, they're automatically going to allow aid to continue during the unwind. Again, whether this will ever happen again, who's to say, but it's another protection that's in place now, because I think people are anticipating there's going to be a lot of confusion for a lot of people as they have to go through this for the first time.
So the asset test and the forestalling of the asset test for 1 year is a one-off. It's a one-time benefit. So you don't have to attest assets, approve assets. You get a reprieve until May of 2024. And if you do have Medicaid benefits and you get curtailed, aid continuing is one of the principal things that you need to ask for, in addition to your fair hearing, to keep those benefits in place. And there are dire predictions across the country because of the pandemic, because of the fact that these applications were filed without a lot of oversight. There is a prediction that 18 million Americans could lose Medicaid coverage. New York's uninsured recipients could jump 20%, according to the RWJ Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And New York's enrollment in the essential plan should reduce the amount of uninsured in the state. What is that, Frank?
I don't counsel people very much on it, but essentially it's low cost or free insurance to those who can't qualify for Medicaid because they're over the limit. So it might be something where that we see Medicaid disenrollments, but we see other health insurance enrollments increase to kind of offset those disenrollments.
And we do talk to a lot of clients who have used the exchange, who have gotten on this program and are using the essential plan at very low cost for decent medical coverage.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, and what Medicaid may have made sense for people during the pandemic, maybe now with everything going back more to normal, maybe now it would make sense to go back onto, you know, the Affordable Care Act plan and things like that, rather than saying just strictly Medicaid. But again, that's much more for an individualized review.
We do much more work with people who need long-term
Yes.
services and long-term care services, and that's a whole different game and a whole different animal. And for those folks that do need in-home care or nursing home care or assisted living ALP coverage, this is a game that's going to have to be played over the next 24 months, because you're going to get a hiatus for a year, and then you're going to have people who are going to start to do their renewals with a full asset test. And that's really where some of these cases are going to get dire, because if you're in a nursing home and you lose Medicaid coverage, what happens? Who's going to pay? Who's going to carry you? And are you going to get evicted by that nursing home? We're not going to face that probably for another year.
Yeah. but you never know.
Right. So what about the ability to attest?
Can't do it anymore if your application was filed after July 1st. So just to show the difference, we have an open case. We got a document request from a county, and right on their document requests, they say, if this is the case where this asset is reduced or doesn't exist, whatever their question is, you can call us and just tell us that. Well, that application was filed prior to July 1st, so they're still operating under pre or during COVID easements. For if we did the exact same application, submitted it today, if we got the same request in a few weeks, they would not be able to say, oh, just call us and tell us what's going on. They would say, you must show us through documentation whether this is true, whether this isn't true, what, however would they want to answer it.
And I always thought an easement was a right to go over a piece of real property. You had a legal right to use a driveway or something, but they have a new meaning for easement.
Yeah, so another ease that we've seen in the application process, just making this now harder because they made it easier, is that during the public health emergency, the application could be signed by someone acting on an individual's behalf. So that was your nursing home workers, it could be the family friend, it could be anybody who had access to that person, because if you remember, if you go all the way back to the start of the pandemic, it was almost impossible in certain circumstances to get access to people if they were in a facility or something, because we weren't allowed to go in, we weren't allowed to have face-to-face meetings. So they obviously put protections in place to make sure that someone could sign on their behalf to submit an application. Now you need to have that more formal relationship, whether that's the applicant, their spouse, their power of attorney, their guardian. Again, things that we were much more concerned about prior to the pandemic. We were very fortunate we were able to, continue to file our applications using the authorized people, but I don't know if that's the case for everyone who may be watching.
So you have to have some legal agency. Power of attorney is fine. You can sign as power of attorney. Guardian, clearly you're appointed by the court. You can sign as a guardian. A spouse can sign for the other spouse, but it's pretty limited after that.
Yeah, it's like your kids can't just sign because they're your kids unless they have legal authority with that power of attorney and that guardianship. Spouses are a little bit.
What about if there's missing information?
Can't just tell them over the phone. It's exactly what I was just talking about before. It's if you have missing info, you got to prove it. Whether that's, it's going to be typically be some kind of documentation. And again, if you have a problem with finding out what it is or obtaining what you need, talk to your worker. Again, a lot of them want to work.
And finally, some helpful hints.
Make sure that your address is on file. I don't know how many times we can say that, but it's very, very important now, maybe more so than in the past because of all these renewal paperwork. Other thing is New York City, you can actually do a lot of your renewals online. We put the link to the website here on the screen in front of us. So if you're in New York City, it might make sense to look into whether this is available to help you do everything online, and then you don't have to worry about paper anymore.
www.nyc.gov/access-HRA. And again, make sure that your address of all of the people who are on Medicaid is up to date with the appropriate offices. And we're almost done. We're going to cover two quick examples, right?
Yeah, so one, again, just showing kind of the difference that we're seeing. So we had a young man, he applied for chronic care Medicaid during the pandemic. He had no income. He literally didn't have any income. He's now come up for recertification, and now the county offices, now in order for him to continue to remain on benefits, he now has to apply for Social Security, disability, and Medicare as part of his continuation with Medicaid, because there is a well-known Medicaid rule that you must seek all available income and resources as a condition of ongoing eligibility. They didn't have to ask, they couldn't ask that in 2022. They can now.
So a lot of issues that are bubbling up to the surface now that the unwinding is occurring, and a husband and wife chronic care.
Yeah, this is
scenario.
This is a much more standard, I think, renewal example where now people didn't have to gather all their documents for the past X number of years, 2, 3, whatever it was. And now we have a husband in this example that we had to send back to the bank and get all the updated income and all the updated asset numbers. And he said, I haven't had to do this in 3 years. It's like, well, you didn't have to, but now you do.
Now you do. So the next Medicaid Monday coming up in August will be my partner, Aaron Connor, and none other than Frankie Hemming III, our Medicaid specialist, and that's on special needs and Medicaid planning. So there are some unique aspects for individuals with special needs under age 65, primarily, who are applying for and receiving Medicaid, whether it be on a waivered services program or other types of programs, and we'll talk about the TBI waiver, OPWDD waiver, and others that apply to individuals who need long-term care and Medicaid services, and some of the planning opportunities, special needs trusts and things that are available to them. So we hope that you can join us on August 14th, again, 12 noon. You can sign up if you're not already signed up right on our website at pierrolaw.com. And with that, our formal presentation has ended.